Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Bankruptcy Notifications, How to Convert from Paper to E-Notices by the December Deadline. This is a pre-recorded webinar, but both our guest speaker and myself are available via live chat for any questions you have in real time. So please reach out during the presentation. Before we begin, I'll cover a few housekeeping items. In your GoToWebinar panel, you'll find a copy of our presentation deck and links to some resources. I'd like to draw your attention to our newest product sheet titled Electronic Bankruptcy Notification Plus. Make sure to check that out before the session's over. Also, please be reminded that the information provided today is not legal opinion and should not be relied upon as such. The opinions shared are those of the speakers personally. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Chuck Lundquist, and I oversee business development at Verus Financial's Bankruptcy Division, LCI. Throughout my tenure at LCI, I keep my finger on the pulse of bankruptcy in order to understand trends and provide insights into how creditors and lenders can better manage the complex bankruptcy processes. My goal for all our clients is to reduce bankruptcy account management costs, maximize bankruptcy recoveries, limit compliance risk, and increase efficiencies with bankruptcy management teams. Joining me today is Bob Look from BAE Systems, who is currently project manager for the U.S. Bankruptcy Court's Bankruptcy Notice Center, the BNC. His primary focus is to support the BNC's high volume notice recipients, and he is the subject matter in EBN, XML, EDI, and email bankruptcy data feeds. Over his 44-year career, he's focused on the application of technology and human labor on large enterprise missions, specifically on effective management of large document collections. Thanks for joining us today, Bob.
Good to be here.
So today we'll be doing a short overview of the bankruptcy landscape and trajectory of bankruptcy filings in 2021. Then we'll dive into the updated Bankruptcy Procedure Rule 9036, which will have a significant impact for creditors who receive a high volume of bankruptcy notices. In this section, we'll share some examples of the options available from the BNC and the risks and benefits of working with the BNC only or also with an authorized agent. Then we'll dive in further, sharing how you can use LCI as an authorized agent to ensure and enhance the data that you have get from the BNC notices in a solution that we call EBNS or EBN Plus. Finally, we'll go through a page-by-page overview of how you can make the switch and get in compliance with the December 1st policy change. So here we go, let's go. So looking at data from over the past 15 years, we've certainly seen a roller coaster in bankruptcy filings, especially during COVID. Following the passing of BAPCPA in 2005, filings started growing, specifically after the flexible regulations in the mortgage space, leading into the 2008 market crash and bankruptcy surge. We peaked in 2010 at about 1.59 million filings, and it took over 5 years from that point to stabilize at pre-crash levels, around 750 to 800,000 filings. When the pandemic struck in early 2020 and unemployment skyrocketed, stimulus and other government action not only helped new consumers stay out of bankruptcy, but also significantly reduced the number of filings for people who may have been right on the financial edge of going into the pandemic. 2020 filings reduced to just over 500,000 filings, and the full year impact in 2021 has reduced filings even further. As of November 13th, 2021, there have only been about 350,000 filings in 2021, less than half the filings from 2019. There's projections of 2022 returning to levels seen in 2020 or even 2019, and we're currently working on our future bankruptcy forecast, so stay tuned for our upcoming 2022 projections. One data point that is coming out clearly is that Chapter 13 bankruptcy filings are coming back as a percentage of total filings. Typically, 13s represent roughly 35% of total filings, but during the pandemic, we've seen that drop to sub 30%, even down to almost 20% in week 22 of 2020. Starting in May, we started seeing a gradual climb, and now we're back up to roughly 35% over the past 2 months. This is encouraging as Chapter 13s represent a much higher recovery opportunity for creditors. So for the most part, bankruptcy has been on the back burner for the better of 18 months, with the lowest filings really since the modern bankruptcy code was enacted. But not to be forgotten, the Supreme Court Rule 9036 regarding the federal rules of bankruptcy procedure was just updated, which will significantly reduce paper notices that creditors receive. So Bob, can you share a little background on the rule change?
Yeah, so the courts do a lot of their administrative work through what they call working groups. And they have a working group that's dedicated to noticing issues. And one of the things they focus on when they go in these meetings about noticing is they're trying to get the volume of paper notices that are being printed and mailed down and replaced by EBN. So for probably the better part of 3 years ago, they started to look at trying to make high volume recipients of paper, and by that they meant over 100 notices a month, receive those notices via electronic means rather than paper. And they finally culminated their work and had it approved internally to the courts. And then, so it was implemented. I guess the memorandum went to the Congress that it was being implemented this year on December 12th. So that's kind of the background of how we got to this new policy that we're going to talk about today.
Okay. Well, in the notes themselves, so I'm opening up the committee note here from the Supreme Court. You can see that high volume paper notice recipients are defined as those that receive more than 100 notices. So I know that there's a lot of different types of notices that are sent out by the BNC. When you count the 100 notices, which ones are included in that?
So it'll be all of the notices that the BNC produces, from first meeting notices, discharges, the whole, anything produced by the BNC.
And if a creditor receives more than 100 notices, then they need to register an email address with the BNC, right? Can you share what happens? What if they don't register by December 1st?
So when this process begins in about a month, every month we're going to do a look at the last month to see who was a high volume recipient. They'll get a correspondence from us that informs them of the fact that they've been designated a high volume. And then we'll work with them for a couple of months to try and get them to sign up for EBN, or to, if they already have EBN, modify their EBN agreement so that they lower their amount of paper that they're getting. That's usually going to be by adding names and addresses to their agreement. And after that 2 months has gone by, if they haven't, assuming they aren't in the process of trying to get, working with us to take care of the issue, the BNC is going to create an email box on a BNC server and start sending their notices to that mailbox. We'll send them a paper correspondence in the mail as to what their user ID password would be to get onto the mailbox and retrieve their notices.
Okay, so I put up an example here of a single made-up lender, Acme Parts, where each unique name and 9-digit zip combination. So each separate combination of those, they would get a separate email address assigned to them if they don't sign up for EBN, right? Because you're using the different combinations of names and addresses, right?
Right. So if you look at this, I guess there's 2 unique names, one being Acme Parts, the other being Acme Parts Incorporated. And even though the actual address is specified below the name, in this example, at least one of them has a different 9-digit zip code. So it's when BNC talks about addresses, what we actually use in our daily processing is a 9-digit zip code generated by the address. Okay. So we do our matching on a unique name and unique 9-digit zip code combination. In this example, 2 names and 2 addresses, 2 9-digit zip codes would produce 4 combinations.
Mm-hmm. So this could get really sticky for creditors that have a lot of different notices with multiple addresses if they don't sign up for this, right?
Yes, it could. And we're actually internally discussing a potential manual process where we're going to try and consolidate items that a human being would say, oh, these are obviously the same recipient.
Mm-hmm.
By exact character and a match of name and exact character of match of 9 digits. The computer would think of them as separate. But barring that, there are many examples where even a human wouldn't be able to tell that the name and address is not that's going to. So yeah, so people with EVN agreements already could potentially, if they have a lot of names and addresses not in their agreement, could potentially get multiple new email boxes if they don't work with us ahead of time and get the names and addresses added to the agreement.
Got it. And I know that we have some examples that we'll go over later on in the presentation here. But so let's go into a normal bankruptcy process. And to make this real simple, I like just starting with consumer bankruptcies. So on a high level, when a consumer files bankruptcy, the consumer lists their creditors and agencies that should be notified of the bankruptcy in a creditor matrix. And that matrix, and for some subsequent notices, a notification matrix is sent to the BNC, and then the BNC uses that list to generate notices by either paper, email, or an electronic data feed. And then the lender creditor then receives that bankruptcy notice and can act accordingly. And I know there's a bunch of other steps here where I know even the BNC sends back a certificate of service to the courts to be updated in Pacer, but for simplicity's sake, this is our common workflow. But when we look at what's going on now, the updated Rule 9036 is making it so paper notices are going to be turned off. And so those lenders who previously were receiving paper, again, just to reiterate this, they're going to have to either request an email or electronic notices be sent to them, or as stated a minute ago here, they'll be automatically set up for separate email boxes for each one of those unique name and address combinations. And the rule goes into effect on December 1st. So from a short-term perspective, this is something that creditors, especially high volume creditors who receive many different notices from the BNC, they need to get on top of this immediately, or they could wake up on December 2nd with no paper and multiple email boxes, right? Right, Bob?
Well, it's coming fast, and the policy starts December 1st.
Mm-hmm.
But the first time we'll do a review of who received a lot of paper would
Great.
be 1 month after December 1st, or approximately sometime in the first week of January. And then keep in mind, we're going to try and give 60 days of communication back and forth, give them time to voluntarily sign up. But at the end of that point in time, if they haven't, that's when we would assign them a mailbox and start sending those notices there. So I think the first mailboxes that we're going to create, as opposed to something that gets created by the creditor through the EVN sign-up process, would probably be around April 1st.
Okay.
But we're going to continue that monthly. There's going to be a monthly process. So first week of every month, we'll look at the prior month for who that month was a high volume recipient, and begin that 2-month process with them of back and forth. At the end of which we would make a mailbox for them if they didn't work through the normal sign-up process to take care of the high volume.
Okay, and as I understand it, you're proactively reaching out to those high volume paper recipients currently, right?
Yes, and we have been for better part of 6 months now. I mean, it would be a goal of ours to have. We'd love to have no mailboxes that we create.
Sure.
But I certainly want to keep it as low as possible.
That makes sense. Well, in our intro, I mentioned that one of my roles is to stay on top of how creditors manage their bankruptcies, and I look for every possible way to reduce compliance and increase efficiencies. And often my first conversation with creditors who I haven't spoken with before, they describe sometimes their broken process, which may include automatic stay violations, and if they're being notified by a consumer themselves during a collections process that they're bankrupt. This can often be because the creditor has dozens of name and address combinations. With an example, paper notices are sent to local branches of a bank as well as to a national branch or a national consolidated or centralized location. Or sometimes they're using a vendor and they kind of ignore those B&C notices, and they use this vendor just to monitor their portfolio for new bankruptcies identified and matched through Paster. But in any case, it should be a huge red flag if there's any gaps in identifying and flagging bankrupt accounts. And so as we look, I'm going to go through a couple different examples here of how a lot of creditors use bankruptcy notifications with different types of agents. So in this first example, a lender receives a bankruptcy notice from the B&C in the same way that we described earlier, but contracts with and provides a full portfolio of accounts to a third-party vendor, similar, or it could be LCI. The vendors or agents monitor court data from Pacer on a nightly basis, looking for new updates to bankruptcy cases. And they match that court data against the client portfolios and provide back notices. One thing to note here, though, is that data collection standards and matching algorithms lead to varying qualities of data across different vendors, leading to potential missed key parts of data or different data that may be missing. So I'll give you an example here. A creditor has a core portfolio of accounts that they send to this third-party vendor, but maybe they missed sending a subset of accounts, maybe recent charge-off accounts. If one of those recent charge-offs went bankrupt but wasn't in the portfolio that was being monitored, there's no way the third party would know about it. And in another case, some vendors are unable to match nicknames. For example, in the time since she opened her account, Kathy Smith moved and she was divorced, going back to her maiden name, Catherine Thompson, and then she went bankrupt. A lot of vendors are unable to recognize that those two people are the same. So a combination of B&C data plus data from the third-party vendor will likely complete the puzzle, but usually after multiple cross-checks and validation steps, especially with paper notices. By changing to email notices, we're moving a step ahead and moving a step forward by eliminating potential scanning and data entry and saving the environment in a way also, because you're not having all that paper anymore. But there could still be a significant amount of duplicate efforts going on. So before we go into the B&C forms, let's take this a step further and show how LCI works with our clients, what we call EB&S or EBM+. So this best practice is something that LCI set up with dozens of accounts, and we're both monitoring our client's portfolio, and we've been set up as an authorized agent with a trading partner agreement where we receive the client's B&C notices rather than those notices going to the client. So in this example, a creditor signs an authorized agent form, which allows LCI to be sent the electronic notices through the EDI, electronic data interchange. These notices automatically go to LCI and then are consolidated and deduped against the portfolio monitoring data that we match from Pacer. This allows LCI to send a single data feed that is an automated, accurate source of bankruptcy notifications. Our clients then also have access to view that case information directly from our online case research system, Cadet, which is where if they want to actually review the actual case docket events or the latest documents, those are available at the touch of a button on an online website. So I will share my contact information at the end of the presentation if you're interested in using the Rule 9036 change as an opportunity to increase more efficiencies in your bankruptcy or collections team. So now let's talk about how you can make the switch to either B&C emails or to using an authorized agent. So Bob, I've spoken a lot and just here in the last few minutes, but I want to give you some more mic time here. So we're going to get into these forms. So there's really these two distinct forms, the BNC registration form and then the authorized agent form. Can you share a little bit more about those?
Okay, so the BNC registration form is a form that the BNC uses to do 4 things approximately. One is to register for a new EBN trading partner agreement, which is what would convert paper to electronic notices. Another is to register for what's called a NCRS, or National Creditor Registration Service Agreement, which is, in a simple way, it's a mail forwarding order only for BNC mail that stays in place till it's turned off, unlike the post office mail forwarding agreements that usually expire after a year.
Sure.
And then it can be used for creating linked EBN trading partner and NCRS agreements, which means the 2 agreements created from the one submission will always synchronize their names and addresses they use for matching.
Okay.
Then the agreement, it's also used to change a few levels of service. If you were adding EDI service to something that had been email only, you would use that form as opposed to a change form, which you use for other kinds of changes. And then you have the evidence of authority form, which I guess its real formal name is the evidence of authority authorized agent form. And simply, that's just to designate business services organization as your agent. So the recipient, the principal, let's say Acme Widgets says, for example, LCI is authorized as my agent, and I'm directing the BNC that my BNC notices can be directed to the agent as opposed to myself. And that form in the old days, that's simply all it did. We've added a couple of little check boxes you see below the name and address there that allow the principal to designate or delegate authority for certain simple administrative changes to the actual agreement as well.
Okay, and we'll go into that form a little bit in just a minute here. Well, so if we go into the first page, we can actually go page by page on these. And if we're on page 1 here on the BNC registration form, in this example, let's just use the example that we're switching to email notices using a designated email address. Can you share how somebody would fill out this section of the form?
So when you're looking at it, there's 2 main things they have to do on this part of the form. They have to put their name and the name of the subscriber field. The trading partner number is going to be left blank. The BNC will add that later during the processing of the form. And then you got to check one of these 3 boxes. In this case, our example, we're checking all bankruptcy notices received by email. That's probably one of those simpler choices you can make.
Okay.
And one thing I would want to remind people of is, I think today I mostly want people to get familiar with these forms, not to become experts on them. And the BNC oftentimes will actually provide draft, partially filled out agreements for people
Wow.
to help them. And people should feel free to, use us to help them with these forms, because they can be a little bit arcane at times. There's 2 other choices there. One is to get EDI. And the third is, if you wanted to use this form simply to create an NCRS agreement, you would check the bottom box only.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really helpful that you're willing to help even generate this form, or at least create a draft for creditors. So anybody listening to this webinar, make sure that you take advantage of that, because that is, I know I've seen many of these different agreements, and so to cut down on the back and forths, I think that would be really helpful to take advantage of that offer. So if we go to the second page, this is really sharing how the program works. I think that it's really interesting to call out the redundant mode, this 30-day period of EBN service that's offered, that's redundant, both paper and EBN notices, or multiple different types of notices that can come through. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so when people sign up for the first time for EBN, we turn them on in what we call redundant mode. And all that means is for every notice that we convert to an electronic notice, we also create a paper notice and send it in the mail. So you'll be, in that case, you'll be getting a duplicate notice. You get both an electronic and a paper notice for that 30-day period. Recipients can turn that off at any time that they want. Some people actually, some of the agents who are used to this and know they've got the solid systems will tell us to turn it off day one. But you have the 30 days with email. And if you get EDI, we give people an initial 90 days. I can, without asking anyone, give an extension to that 90 days. And beyond the 180 days, we sometimes get permission to go even longer. And we're doing that because EDI is a fairly complicated thing to develop. If you're not getting an off-the-shelf package or process from an agent and you're doing it internally, it can take a lot of back and forth, a lot of testing and fixing bugs. And so during that time, you get the redundant paper.
Yeah, we've gone through many of these implementations where we are taking on LCI and Verus Financial. We're taking on the EDI feeds, and I know that our systems have been built to be scalable and implemented relatively quickly for our clients, so that they don't have the back and forth there. So, but yes, it is a complex process if you're doing it on your own. If I go into then page 3, so this really gets into the nitty gritty when we're talking about contact information, we're talking about the subscriber information and the electronic notice settings. You want to share a little bit more on about these details that need to be filled out?
So on page 3, you've got section 1. It says contact information, and people often ask us, what do you mean by contact? So usually what we want there is the person that we may contact on a day-to-day operations basis. Hey, your email got bounced back. Is your mailbox full, or is there something wrong with your email? We have an obligation at the BNC to make sure these get through. So we will follow up on something like that. And that's the person in that box is the person that you'd want us to call for those types of things. And sometimes it's a person within the recipient, sometimes it's a business servicing agent. But again, it's somebody that, would be working on the day-to-day operations of receipt of the notices. And then the second box, the subscriber information. Oftentimes the person in there and the person in box 1 are the same. But for the purposes of the people that you see in this box and the subscriber information would be like the head of a department or head of contracts. This is the point of contact that you'd want the BNC to contact in regards to changes to an agreement.
Okay.
And then finally, that number 3 box is kind of designating some of the details about how you want your mail delivered. For people that are getting EDI, we generally always recommend one email box with one text link, because they're usually doing some kind of programming against the format. We have 3 formats. The top 2 formats are generally chosen by people that have human beings answering the mail and clicking on links, as opposed to a software program that's automatically doing that for them. So that's items 1 through 3. And
oh, great. And so page 4 and 5, this is really one thing you're getting into the preferred address information, and this is how you work with subscribers. I'm actually going to open up another example in our next page here. This shows this is again a fake creditor, Acme Parts, but there's 871 different name variations and 146 different addresses. And as I understand it, Bob, the BNC actually will take this list and search for every name and address combination or permutation for EBN matching purposes. And I think you said that you're actually willing to help work with creditors to put this list together, right?
Yes, I routinely do that for both initial agreements and for updating or existing agreements to add new addresses or new name variants.
Because sometimes there's different punctuation that somebody is going to use, or a 5-digit zip code instead of the 9-digit zip code, or like lots of different combinations there. So that's pretty incredible that you're willing to help out there. And I think on the last page here, this is relatively simple here, but this is just the authorization form, right? You just have to sign this, make sure that whoever it is that is signing this has the authority to make the switch. And so it's got to be the right person. Pretty simple. Bob, anything you want to add to that?
No, other than go ahead and make sure if you need it all, use us to help do draft agreements, come up with name and address variants. I would highly recommend people, especially with this short notice, to work through an agent because they have lots and lots of experience and knowledge and off-the-shelf software that has been tested over the years. So.
Sure. And so if you're using then an authorized agent or a third-party vendor like LCI, you can also fill out the authorized agent form here, the evidence of authority form for authorized agent, as you correctly stated. And so this also allows the agent to make updates if they make those check marks that you talked about earlier. They can update the name and address lists on behalf of the creditor if those are checked, and kind of makes it easier for the third party, the authorized agent, to update the list and not have to go through the creditor themselves. But are there any other key elements of this form that you'd like to point out here?
Well, the only thing is there's a third form that we haven't talked about, but that lower checkbox references evidence authority form for related names. And that you tend to get into where a company does a merger and the names they're adding don't look anything like the names of the actual company.
Okay.
By putting them on that form, they're attesting to the fact that, no, these really are something we're legally responsible for.
Got it. Well, very good. Well, if I go into, again, to really summarize our discussion, so for high volume lenders who receive more than 100 paper notices per month, the time to receive paper is coming up starting on December 1st, but there's going to be a process that's going to go on for a few months. And then you'll be converted by choice to an email you select, or each unique name and address combination may get a separate email address created for it. So in order to have control over the email selection, you have to fill out the BNC's registration form, or again, as Bob said, if you've already done this, this could be a really good time to update your name and address lists with the BNC to make sure you aren't missing anything. Then for those that are interested in using a third party or authorized agent, you'll want to fill out the change of service form to receive the notices by EDI, and then an authorized agent form to assign LCI or another vendor as your authorized agent to receive your electronic notices from the BNC. So we are a little biased here. We certainly recommend working with LCI to enhance your data and ensure that you reduce your compliance risk and really eliminate those duplicative efforts that are caused by managing multiple different data feeds. But in any case, we're happy to help in any case, in any way that we can. So for next steps, make sure to reach out to me if you have any questions or anything on this presentation. chuck.lundquist@verisk.com, or Bob is available if you want to reach out to him directly. Robert.look@baesystems.com, and he'll be happy to assist you moving on to electronic notices Bob, any parting thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, other than it's always enjoyable working with LCI.
Well, great. Well, thanks, Bob. Finally, we do have some more information on our website on our EBM Plus system, which is really designed to consolidate notifications, keep you in compliance, and reduce overhead. So thank you again, Bob, from BAE Systems and the Bankruptcy Noticing Center for the wealth of information that you provided for this webinar. We look forward to continue to work closely with you and our clients on future implementations of EBN and EBN Plus. If you'd like to learn any more, please visit the Insights and Events tab on the LCI website, lciinc.com. For your convenience, we've shared that link in the chat box of your GoToWebinar panel. Today's recording is also available for listening within a week on our Insights and Events tab. This concludes our session for today. If we didn't have time to answer your questions during the webinar, we can follow up with you individually. And if you have any additional questions or comments, please email us at LCI, info@lciinc.com, or connect with us on LinkedIn. Again, a big thank you to Bob. And for those of you who joined our session, have a great rest of your day. Thank you.